Good evening. Thank you for attending the Profitable High Tunnel Management webinar with guest Adam Montri of Ten Hens Farm in Michigan State University. My name is Eric Pulaski. I am the Sustainable Agriculture Educator with OEFFA, and I will moderate this evening's presentation. This event is part of a series of educational programs offered to specialty crop growers by OEFFA and the Cuyahoga Valley Countryside Conservancy.
I hope some of you or all of you were out working today. We had some nice weather here in mid-Michigan and got some things transplanted and watered and some office time as well. So seems like maybe we are finally into the spring here, but we'll see. So again, tonight we're going to talk about profitable high tunnel management. We got a little bit of an intro and then an outline of what we're going to be talking about and how we're going to go through it. And as Eric said, I'll go ahead and answer questions during this if they're kind of applicable to the slide that's up or what we're talking about, but we also have some time blocked at the end for questions as well. All right, so for tonight, there's kind of a number of things that go into profitable management. It's not just production and growing, it's marketing, it's soil health and maintenance at the basis or at the root of everything that we do. It's managing pests and disease. Thinking about rotations, thinking about crop and cultivar selections. When we're talking about profitability, we're also talking about figuring out our cost of production, and we'll look at an example of that. And then some product pricing as well. And then again, we'll talk a little bit about marketing strategies or market strategies at the end. Just so you know a little bit about me and where I'm coming from, I work part-time at Michigan State University in the Department of Horticulture and with the Center for Regional Food Systems. Work on two really specific projects. One is Hoophouse for Health, which is a project with the Michigan Farmers Market Association, the Center for Regional Food Systems, and the Department of Horticulture here at MSU. What we do is provide, with some funding from W.K. Kellogg Foundation, we provide capital for farmers to build hoop houses and provide technical assistance throughout the length of their production in there, and in return they're providing products at targeted farmers markets for vulnerable youth and their families. It's a program where we provide funding up front, and then that funding is then repaid by using vouchers that are distributed through Head Starts and other partner organizations in the communities that those farmers markets targeted. So I spend most of my time on that, working with the farmers as part of that program. And then we're also in the process right now of building an online high tunnel course that will run through the university here. That will be a not-for-credit course available for farmers. And we hope to launch that in late fall, early winter of this year. Besides working part-time at Michigan State, my wife and I also, and our two daughters also have Ten Hens Farm in Bath, Michigan. It's about 15 minutes from campus here in our rural bedroom community. So there we are pretty small. We grow on just over an acre, but on that acre, this is half of the farm, we also have 6 30 by 96 foot hoop houses. So we've got about 17,000 square foot of year-round unheated hoop house or high tunnel production space. So everything is obviously on that small of acreage. It's all really intensively planted. Our markets are mostly restaurants. We sell to about 9 different restaurants in the greater Lansing area. And then we do one farmer's market that runs year-round weekly. So besides in the tunnels, this is the other half of the farm. Between a couple of the tunnels, we also do outdoor production. So there were some onions last year and some leeks and shallots. And then, as I said, we also do things in the winter. With that smaller acreage, we feel like we need to be, or we want to be growing year-round. Just to keep cash flow working on the farm and to also support what we like to do. So there's outside and then there's inside. From this year, there's a picture of some romaine lettuce growing. So, all right. So that's kind of just so you guys know where we're coming from. Is that partly university side as well as really practical, applicable, running a for-profit business. That everything needs to click and everything needs to work for us to be able to pay our bills and make some money and be rewarded for the hard work that you guys all know goes into farming. So our fertility practices, I'd say we're not certified organic. We do follow rules and regulations. The only thing that we don't follow is that we do have treated lumber on our hoop houses that's in contact with the soil. So otherwise, any inputs that we use and or any pesticides are all allowable under or certified organic production. So the first few years we did keep all the records because we thought that we may become certified, but our market hasn't really asked us to do that yet, and we're into our 6th year, 7th year now. So so that's where we're at. So our fertility practices on our farm and on a lot of the farms that we work with are very compost driven. So within the tunnels especially, it's really intensive planting, really close together, really quick turnover, really high demand from that soil. And so we are putting in large amounts of compost, and we'll talk about how much we're putting in. We also have some additional amendments, especially for long season crops, like tomatoes, peppers, things that are in for going in mid-April to early May, and then staying in the tunnel for into October or later, depending on where they're at in the rotation. So for our compost, and we'll talk here about that it is plant-based. We have a source close by us. I don't think that it has to be plant-based, but I think that once we switch to an animal-based compost for use in the tunnels, what we've started to see and what others have seen across the country is that because of the nature of animal waste, we have high soluble salts, and there's a pretty good chance that soluble salt levels are going to build up over time. So ours is mostly grass-based, some that we make at the student farm, and some that other farmers that I know make is hay-based for the plant material. And I think that, again, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be animal-based, but I just think the application rates are probably going to be pretty different if we're plant-based versus animal-based. All right, so this is about what we do, give or take. I'll be honest in saying we don't really completely measure it out every time that we're putting it in, but we have a pretty good idea. With our tunnels, they're all designed except for one, which is getting switched over this year, are designed to be able to drive our tractor in. We just got a 30-horse Kubota with a loader on it. And so I know, what the bucket size is, and I put about this many buckets in each time. So we put about 3 yards, 96-foot hoop house, and we do that about 3 times a year. We do that. We do get 4 crops in if we sneak in like a quick radish or a quick cacti turnip or something like that. But for the most part, we're getting 3 crops per year. So so that's about 9 cubic yards per house per year, which sounds like a lot, but when it works out to it, it's only about a ½ an inch per year that we're putting in there. And we can get it for right around $20 delivered. So we're ended up, talking about $180 per tunnel per year in compost, which in my mind is a pretty low rate, or pretty low cost for fertility for a whole year per tunnel. Right. So a couple different ways to do it. In the top left is a manure spreader going before the tunnel was built. In the bottom right, there's also some moving in with wheelbarrows. We used to move it in with wheelbarrows. We used to move it in by hand when we had different doors on them or we were at a smaller scale. Now, again, we're driving it in mostly with tractors. For some of our tomatoes and other transplants, we're driving in with the tractor, and then we're usually putting a mound or a pile for each plant. Usually I'll go ahead and put those down so it's at the right spacing, and then our employees can come behind us and go ahead and plant into those compost piles. All right, so there's our tractor. Again, it's nothing fancy, 30 horse. It's small enough to be able to get into the tunnel or all the tunnels, and we have a 5-foot tiller that goes on the back of it. And the bucket on the front is about 7.5 or 8 cubic feet. So. Again, so there's another picture you saw earlier. There, now you can see the doors. They're hinge doors. They're about 4 by 8 each, so we end up with an 8 by 8 foot spacing. And there's a small, I think I'm going to try to click here. I think this is the clicker button. Oh no, that's not the clicker button. So, right behind the door, you can see a piece of wood. We have that there for when we close the door, and especially in the winter, it forms not a good seal, but it keeps the wind from blowing in between those doors. And when we drive the tractor in, we just have a few screws we can take out and move that down. All right. So another thing to think about for soil management and fertility is cover cropping. So there's definitely a lot of people, or a number of people, that are talking about cover cropping in the tunnels right now, and there's people that are doing it for some specific reasons. A lot of it seems to have to do with managing the soluble salt, high soluble salt levels. We don't cover crop in the tunnels. It's not something that we suggest or that we encourage people to do. In our mind, when we start cover cropping in the tunnels, what we would start to do is take out production space that otherwise could be making us money. So I understand why people are thinking about doing it, or why they're doing it to try to combat some issues that have come up. But I think if we manage our compost differently, or we manage what type of compost we put in or the amounts we put in, then we shouldn't have to cover crop in there. What we're trying to do with cover crops is add organic matter, improve fertility, combat some weeds, and I think we can and provide some rotation. And I think that if we manage our tunnels right, we can do that with all of those things with compost. So, but I do think it's a really good idea to cover crop before before you put your tunnel up, if you know where you may have one in the future. This is our place the first year we moved in. That's some winter rye that is heading out in May the following year. It had been in an orchard for 60 years when we moved in here, and so we had pulled some dead and dying and diseased trees out, and so we had a lot of perennial grasses that we were trying to battle early on, and so we plowed and cover cropped and then built the tunnel the following year. So some additional things that we add in are some blood meal and some bone meal, potassium sulfate, and those are those are amounts per 30 by 96 foot tunnel. We usually only do that when we are putting in our summer crops. We usually don't with additional soil amendments for the winter or the spring crops. I think the compost provides enough for them. But we are coming in, especially for things like tomatoes, and managing the potassium sulfate. If you are certified organic, just make sure that it's there's some potassium sulfate that's allowable under organic production, and there's some that is not. So if you are certified, just check with your certifier, whether that's OEFFA or someone else. To make sure that the product that you are using, if you do use that, is allowable. So for these, what we do is go ahead and they only go in the bed space. So we have 5 beds in a 30-foot tunnel. They're about 4 feet by 88 feet or so. Some are a little narrower, some are a little longer. They usually start out at that size and kind of shrink down as we harvest over the season. So we also look at yield indicators and plant health to determine if we need to put these in. So we do track all of our yields for all of our crops, and can look year to year to see, do we need to put in any more amendments. And we do soil test. We don't soil test every year, which as a university employee, I should probably be saying that you should soil test every year. Early on in our first 3 or 4 years, we did soil test every year. And I feel like now that we've kind of got things under control and understand where we're growing and know what's happening with our soils, that I still think that we soil test it, maybe every other year, every third year now. Or if we did have some sort of deficiency or some things that came up, we would go ahead and definitely do a soil test. All right. So then kind of the next piece to being successful is thinking about rotation, and I think this is probably the hardest thing. And what we get the most questions about. This is an example of the tunnels at the student farm, how we manage them, and they have about the same square footage there as we do at home. And so we grow a little more square footage of tomatoes and those kinds of crops. They're a CSA market mostly, and a little bit in a farm stand, but mostly CSA. And so they have more of some things that we don't grow and less of some things that we do grow. But what we start to see is in the top left, is we've got these kind of categories. We have these fall early planted crops that stay in more or less all winter long, and then we continue to harvest off of them in the spring. Below that, we kind of have these fall late planted crops that stay in a long time, and the BLSM is baby leaf salad mix, so baby salad. That gets planted a little bit later because we still can get it out of the field fairly late. And it doesn't take long to get up to harvestable size. And then that stays in most of the winter and then again gets harvested in the spring when it starts to regrow. And then we also have these kind of fall that are planted later that are shorter residency that stay in, for not as long. So, and that would be things that are mostly heading crops or root crops. So for us, at least where we're at in mid-Michigan, warmer part of Zone 5, or cooler part of Zone 5, warmer part of Zone 4-ish, we have a really hard time carrying things like head lettuce and those types of heading crops much past the end of December. When it starts to get really cold in January, it just seems that those heads have frozen and thawed enough times. So most of those heading crops, and spinach kind of falls into that, can kind of fall into any of those categories on the left. It can also be long residency where we're harvesting off of it in the spring as well. So what ends up happening is we go back to the top left. We've got this fall, early, long residency. Those crops basically stay in through the spring and then are planted right into our summer crops. So you can see in the bottom right, those beds are going into tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, in some cases summer squash, in some cases beans as well, green beans or yellow beans or purple beans. So what ends up happening is they stay in there, and then when they get pulled in March or April, they're going right into warm season. What we have then is the ones on the bottom left, which are the planted late and are the short residency. So those beds start opening up again late December into January. That then we usually are spending later January and early February, or most of February depending on the year, cleaning those beds up and getting them ready, and then those get planted right into the early spring crops. So those are like the baby leaf salad mix, lettuce, chard, the cold tolerant crops that can take those February and March and even April temperatures. So that said, this year was a little bit different for everyone, I think, thinking about what kind of winter we had and then how cold it was and then how long it took to even start to warm up this spring. We've actually this year only planted, we usually plant 4 to 6 of those tunnels into cool season crops and then transfer a couple of them over quickly to warm season crops. This year we only planted 2 of the tunnels at home into cool season crops because by the time it was warm enough to get in there and do that, we never would have gotten them in and out in time to be able to get the cool or the warm season crops in late April and through the last week here. All right. So kind of the next piece is once we have stuff planted, how do we manage disease and pests in the tunnels? I think this is the approach. It's a pretty IPM approach, and this is what we follow. We're thinking about before anything even happens. Okay, we're planting this crop. What's the potential pests that we've had, or what are pests that we've had in the past, or what have we heard from other farmers, or what are things that could happen to this crop, pest or disease-wise, and how do we tailor our management to try to avoid those things. So one of the big things for us would be flea beetles, and we battled flea beetles for a long time, even early in the season. So even right now we're getting hit. We would be getting hit really heavy with them, but after a few years of getting hit really heavy this time of year, we now run row cover on all of our brassica salad mix as soon as we plant it in the spring, and it stays covered except when we're harvesting. So we know, that's what's going to happen. So we manage our environment. We scout for early identification. So we want to know if something's in there, disease or pest-wise, what we can do to it, or that it's there, and then we need to think about what action we can take early. We're guilty of it at home, and I know other farmers that have said the same thing of, they know that there's a potential to get, say, in the fall, cabbage loopers on brassicas or imported cabbage worm. And so they may have, in an organic system, they may have spinosad that's being sprayed for those if they're spraying something. And I think what we try to not do is think that we have something on hand and not have it on hand and then have to order it and wait a few days or pay rush shipping. So we need to have things on hand that we know so that we can take that action early so that we can combat things. Right? So this is the really IPM approach, thinking about cultivar selection and definitely moisture management. I think especially in the tunnels, that's the #1 thing that we see, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. We have physical or mechanical barriers, so cultivation for anything that's in the soil, or putting up row cover was a good example. Biological, we don't necessarily at home have spots where we're intentionally attracting or releasing biological control, but there are clearly biological controls happening in our tunnels. There's definitely other people and other farmers we work with who manage and release biological controls. I think just what we need to remember about them is that if we have a completely infested house of aphids, that it comes back to that, identifying early and taking action early, that releasing some lady beetles with an entirely infested house isn't going to do much. But if we release them when there are much smaller populations of aphids, then they're going to be able to get those under control. And then, kind of the last resort is that we do have, even in organic systems, that we do have, sprays or other chemical applications that we can use. And we always need to set economic thresholds for action. We're tolerant of some damage on certain things. We're not tolerant of damage on other things. So for us, baby leaf salad mix is a huge income generator for us, and people continue to buy it from us, especially the restaurants, because of the quality of it. And so we can't have any damage on there. We can't have any flea beetle damage on it. So, so our economic thresholds for action are much lower than for things like, say, if we have a little bit of damage on, especially on the leaves of if we're doing eggplant from flea beetles or something like that. Okay. So we need to think about cultivars. When the breeders are putting things together, they put the little things in the seed catalog that tell you that they're resistant to these races or these types of powdery mildew or these types of downy mildew for a reason. That they're not just there to jazz up the catalog. They are definitely there for reasons, and so pay attention to those, and we can use those, especially some of the ones that are resistant to a lot of the fungal diseases. Clearly we need to manage crop rotation. It gets pretty difficult in the tunnels, especially when we had less tunnels. The more tunnels we've got, it's kind of worked itself out where we can rotate tunnels instead of rotating within tunnels. We definitely need to manage moisture in the tunnels, which includes humidity, and especially on the foliage. We need to keep things clean and sanitized, so that means cleaning up weeds along the edges of the tunnel. That means not leaving any type of hand watering wands laying in a pile of mud. And I think it also means managing our fertility closely as well. So here's some potential high tunnel diseases. There's not that many bacterial or viral ones that we see showing up in the tunnels. I'm not saying that they're not there, but clearly what we see most often are the fungal diseases, and that's just because of the environment that we're in. It's an enclosed environment. It's high humidity, and we're trying to manage our ventilation through passive means, so through airflow from the either roll-up sides or opened up ends or big doors or vents. So these are definitely what we see, and the downy mildew, the Sclerotinia, and the Cercospora are clearly ones that we see most common. So this is in ours. This is at the farm we work with in Flint. But their moisture management in most systems and in most tunnels is on drip, especially for transplants or for the summer crops. People are definitely using overhead irrigation for germinating early spring crops, especially things like baby salad mix, carrots, beets, those types of crops. But most of the time then people are switching over to a drip system. So I don't know anyone who's doing an overhead exclusive, especially when they have tomatoes and those types of crops in there. Okay. So here's another example. This is Bill Warner and Judy Hagman up at Snug Haven in Wisconsin. So they're doing drip lanes laid out with the beds running the long way, and managing their moisture through that way. Again, ventilation, lots of different options for end walls and for ventilation and for where to put louvers and that, but we tend to like to put them a little bit higher if we have the opportunity to. What ends up happening is when we roll up the sides, then and open those up, we kind of get a chimney effect where hot air is coming in and it's push your hair's coming in cool air and pushing hot air up, and it's kind of going out those end vents. That being said, end vents down on the sides or each end, the sides of the end is not a bad idea either. On those tunnels that we have with the big doors on them, we don't have enough room up above to be able to put a bigger vent in, so we have ours down on the sides of the doors. Right. So just like the diseases, we tend to have some specific pests in here. I would say that the pests we have in the tunnels are much less prevalent than ones we have out in the field, or I think it's just a closed environment, but we do tend to see more greenhouse type pests. So I would say aphids are one of the main pests that we see, and it's usually this time of the year, and then again in late fall on tomatoes. And this time of the year, usually where we see them coming in from at farms we work with, and on ours as well, even if they're coming in on transplants. So I think we just need to make sure that we have clean transplants that are coming in. If there is something on them, that like aphids especially, that we're holding off. So we have one more flat of tomatoes to put in the tunnels, and it's the only one that had aphids on it for us this year. And so right now that was sprayed with spinosad a couple days ago, and it'll we'll watch it and not plant them in until those aphids are under control and off of those. Otherwise, we're just bringing them right into where they like to be. Again, if you do have them, you can release some predators or parasitoids. So that's usually how they come on cards or in boxes live, and you hang them out there and they hatch out. So this is probably the #1 other pest that we have. So there's some what were nice looking collard greens that are eaten up pretty heavily from cabbage loopers or imported cabbage worms, and again, those are eating before we can even see them. Before we can even see the small worms. So we're definitely in the fall in there looking for both the white butterflies and the off-white butterflies and the worms as well, and treating them accordingly, whether depending on your scale, either hand picking or spraying again. This is kind of the other major pest that we see in the summer, our striped and spotted cucumber beetles. So here we are planting some bacterial-resistant or wilt-resistant cultivars. What we're going to this year is we've been growing Diva mostly for our cucumber. We're going to continue to grow that because it's parthenocarpic, and we're up in Montreal over the winter and talking with some farmers up there. And I've seen it in a couple places in the U.S. here too, where farmers are putting some insect netting along their roll-up sides. And so I think that we're going to end up doing that in our cucumber house this year, just because we battle these for quite a while and usually end up losing that battle part of the way through the season. So to try to continue to have cucumbers coming on and not spend a lot of time trying to deal with striped and spotted cucumber beetles, that we're going to go ahead and put some insect netting along the sides of the tunnel this year. So here's another major thing that we see, and this is mostly in lettuce mix, like you can see here is what it's in, and this is really a bad, strong, heavy case of it. You see some white mold, and usually that happens when things are being overwatered and it's cool, and that water moisture is just sitting down in there where it's so densely planted and it's never really drying out. And so what we've done for this especially is if we do see it, we're clearing out that area. We've also cut way down on our watering. We're actually not even watering in the winter anymore at home, much past November, or I'm sorry, much past October, so very rarely in November are we watering. But we're watering a little bit heavier in October to try to build up some soil moisture to carry us through. And so that's really helped out with trying to manage, especially in the salad mix where things are so densely planted. We see this a lot also, Cercospora on spinach, beets, and chard. So if you guys have tunnels or grow these crops outside especially, you've seen the small circular lesions on the leaves of things in this family. And so the biggest way to battle that, especially in the tunnel, is to use drip irrigation. So the spores are spread by splashing, And so if we can avoid overhead watering and splashing, then we're really managing, that environment in a way that's going to discourage Cercospora, both coming in and spreading across those plants. All right, so we got to have our soil, and we're kind of thinking about our pest and disease management and how we're going to set things up. And then we're going to think about what are we going to plant to be successful. So these are most of the crops that we plant. So peppers, both green and red. We do a lot of basil, cucumbers. We don't do very much eggplant at all anymore. We do a lot of tomatoes. And then we used to do some summer squash and zucchini in the tunnels. We kind of do a little bit of it still, but not nearly as much. It's just it's not that high of return, and there's not really a big premium for it coming out of the tunnel early as compared to some of the other crops that are here that could use that space. All right, so the leafy cooking greens that we grow are spinach, beet greens, chard, kale, collards. We do a little bit of mustards. And I think the biggest thing about these ones, as well as some of the heading ones that we'll look at, are having a market for it. So we know that kale and collards grow really well, and chard too grow really well in the tunnels in the late in the fall through the winter and in the spring. But if we don't have a market where we can be moving leafy greens and where we can be moving them at a price that's going to make them profitable, then it probably doesn't make sense to be growing them. So, but the spinach is clearly, that's a pretty consistent seller, I think, across the board, across places that we've been, both where we sell and farmers that we work with across the country. So, spinach is kind of, what we usually say is kind of the cool season poster child. If you've never done winter farming before, if you get some spinach transplants in or get them seeded and growing in the mid-fall, that you've got a pretty high chance of being successful through the winter. So it can be abused pretty heavily and not cared for and left alone, and it does just fine. So heading greens, there's a number of Asian greens that if you have the market for, they can work. We don't tend to have that market where we sell. The student farm has that market here through their CSA. So, but there's bok choy and tatsoi and some Chinese cabbage. And then in the top left are a couple different kinds of lettuce. So we do have a market for head lettuce. We used to do a lot of the butter crunch, which is in that top right corner, top left corner. The green one on the right side of that picture. We do a little bit of that still, but we've mostly switched over to both red and green romaine, and especially for restaurant sales. And the reason is that we sell to restaurants by pound, and a head of the butter crunch and a head of the romaine get the same spacing, about 10 or 12 by 12 inch spacing. But the butter crunch weighs a lot less than the romaine does, so we've switched over that mostly because of being able to generate more revenue per square foot or more revenue with that crop of romaine as opposed to the butter crunch. But at the market, we sell by the unit mostly, and so we do some of the butter crunch for the market. And it's my wife's favorite lettuce too, so we grow that for home use too. Lots of different root crops, radishes. We usually don't do a lot of radishes, but we do them early in the season. It's quick, it's there, it's something that we can have on the table that's not a leafy green. We do a lot of the hack rye turnips, which are in the top right. The biggest thing we've seen with them is if we can give samples, people buy them. If we can't, they just think they're turnips no matter how much we tell them that they taste great. So, and then the other issue that we've had with them that we now grow them with a row cover over them anytime that we're growing them is cabbage root maggot seems to get to really like those. I mean, we've had radishes and hack ryes right next to each other, and the radishes will be fine, and the hack ryes will just be hit with cabbage root maggot. So we definitely grow them covered now, and we can grow them until they're ready to harvest covered, and so that's really allowed us to be able to grow those and grow them successfully without any damage on the roots. We do a lot of carrots as well, mostly orange ones. We do a few of the purple ones. One of the restaurants we sell to or food truck we sell to is the purple carrot, so we do some purple carrots for them, but for the most part we're growing a couple different varieties of orange ones most of the year. We do an early planting in the tunnel, but then we move outside as soon as we can. We do a number of beets as well, mostly early, and then as soon as we can get outside, we get outside. We don't do the potatoes anymore in the tunnel. We've never done that at home. We did do it at the student farm a little bit. I think the only people I know that are really doing potatoes in their tunnels, last time I talked to them, were Paul and Allison Wiedeger at Au Naturel Farm in Kentucky, and they were doing that because they got early blight on their potatoes every year out in the field from the rain, their spring rains and their warmer temperatures, and so they've moved their potato production inside. But for the most part, I think unless you have that situation or unless you have a really great market that's willing to pay for a good amount of money for new potatoes, they probably don't make that much sense. We do a lot of baby leaf salad greens. That's probably, besides tomatoes, that's our #1 crop, and there's lots of different ways to put it together, and this is just an example of some red oak leaf and mizuna in the middle there, arugula in the bottom left. We like the bull's blood beets in the bottom right. Tend to really only do those more in the late fall. They don't grow very quickly, and their yield's a little bit lower, and it's a little bit more of a pain to seed them for baby salad mix than it is the other crops. But we do them. It adds a nice, you can see that red color and shine. It adds a nice addition to the salad mix. And then in the top right is Tokyo Bacana. It's a Chinese cabbage that we grow in the winter that looks like lettuce. The loopers love it, and the imported cabbage worms love it, so that's just something to watch for in those. So, and again, there's a lot of different ones that you can mix together. We're now doing some red Lola Rosa and red romaine and green romaine baby in the mix. Seen people do pak choy or kometsuna as well for baby mix. Tatsoi goes into our fall stuff. We do dino and baby red Russian kale goes into the mix. And we grow everything separately and then mix it together. So what's nice about that is, one, we can choose our mix, and two, we also sell mizuna and arugula separate. So being able to move that product as well as put it by itself as well as put it into the mixes is nice. Culinary herbs, we've played around with a lot of them. I think for us at least, what we've really come to decide is that cilantro in the fall and winter and early spring is great. Flat leaf parsley in the spring, actually it'll grow all year long, but in the spring especially, and then through the late fall and through the winter. And then basil in the summer are probably the only 3 real culinary herbs that we grow at any scale, and that are profitable for us. So a few other things that aren't on here that we grow. We do some shelling peas and snap peas early on in the tunnels. We can get in there and get them planted and have those to market. It's a nice thing as well, kind of like the radishes. It's one of the first things that we have that's not a leafy green. And I was talking to a farmer, or my wife was talking to a farmer 2 weeks ago that had planted snap peas in their tunnel really late in the fall and got them to germinate and just come up, and then we're harvesting off of them 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that's pretty early for sure. So thinking about, does it make sense to overwinter them as well, really small, and go early in the spring. The other thing would be, that's not on here, that a number of people are playing around with, is ginger. So we did ginger for the first time last year, not a lot, and then we scaled up to do quite a bit, this year. So it sells really well, and it does really well in the tunnels. And it loves it hot, and it loves that, loves being in that environment. We do a few cut flowers. I would say I always like to say there are a lot of other people out there that do a lot more cut flowers and have been doing it for a lot longer than we have. It's just something where we have kind of some space to do. But these are ones that we've had success with. Clearly the Lisianthus are great in the tunnel. For us in mid-Michigan, between the wind and the rain, it's pretty hard to do Lisianthus outside at all and get anything that's worth harvesting, but in the tunnel they do great. Snaps do great too. There's a picture of them in the tunnel there, and you can see we get pretty consistently 25 to 30-inch stems. They're planted really closely together, 4 by 4 or 6 by 6 inch spacing, and then we're pinching them when they're about 4 inches tall, and they're getting 4 to 5 stems then. And then sunflowers as well. We do some Pro Cut, the Pro Cut variety, so it's the single stem, one cut, pull them out, get something else in their place. But between $1 and $1.25 per stem at, again, 6 by 6 inch spacing, you can jam a lot of sunflowers in there. All right, so we're going to spend a little bit of time then talking about cost of production and a lot of numbers. So the numbers, I'll say, are important, but I think what's more important is the concepts that go along with them. So I'm still working on numbers from last year for us. So these are actually 2 winters ago and into the winter of 2012 into spring of 2013. So we'll just look at one crop here. But what we're really interested in is revenue, our costs, our selling costs, depreciation we'll talk about with the tunnel and how we calculate that. Obviously our net income, we want to know what we're making, and then our profit per square foot and also our profit per square foot per day, and we'll talk about why that's important. Return to labor is really, really important. It lets us know either what we're getting back for our labor or what our employees are generating with their labor, or if we can afford to hire employees or what jobs our employees should be doing. And then our sales efficiency is just amount grown versus amount sold. And so in the winter, that usually gets up towards 100% like these are, because we harvest and harvest and harvest, and then things aren't really regrowing that quickly. In the summer, that's spring, summer, fall. It's not at 100. If it's at 100, then I think what that means is that we need to be planting more of it. But in the winter, it's kind of like we plant out as much as we can plant out. So when we sell out, we sell out. All right. So why does any of that stuff matter? So, well, we're really interested in our overall profitability of our farm. We're in it to make money. We're in it as a business, and it needs to be profitable, and it needs to be fairly profitable. I don't want to work really hard as hard as we do and as hard as you guys do on your farms and make a few $1,000s or less. And so I want to know overall profitability. I also want to know our individual crop profitability. So I want to know that if our farm made $30,000 last year, did the tomatoes make $28,000 and the peppers made $2,000 and everything else lost money or broke even? No, that's not the case, but I do want to know, what's more profitable, what's less profitable, and how do we change what we plant based on that. We need to track this for our production volume, so we know we either need to be growing more of something or less of something. Helps us with our market decisions. If we know we need to move a certain amount of tomatoes, and they're all gonna come, starting the 4th of July weekend with the cherry tomatoes out of the tunnels at the latest, then we need to have markets in place where we can start selling that stuff. It lets us set pricing, and it also lets us think about income projections for the following year. So we can start to plan, do we need to invest in something next year that we need to save up for? Do we need to pay off a loan, or do we have the potential to pay off a loan if we can generate some more income? And we talked a little bit about return to labor, and I want to know what my labor is worth and what our employees' labor is worth, and then it lets us know if we need to or when we need to hire additional employees, or if we can. So I think real quickly, a word about record keeping. We always say it when we talk about keeping records, is if you're not going to keep good records, and you're not going to do anything with those good records, more importantly, if they're just going to go in a drawer or a shoebox or stay in the notebook, then it's not worth keeping records. So everyone is really busy, especially through the summer on the farm, and record keeping, just for record keeping's sake, not for any useful means, just is another thing on the list that's going to stress you out or stress me out if we don't do anything with it. So it's important to think about what are you going to do with your records and how are you going to use them. Right. So some things we'll talk about here just so we're all on the same page. Gross sales or revenues, the total amount sold. So if I sold, $1,000 in salad mix, then that's my gross sales. And my net would be, or profit, what I make. So if I sold out of that $1,000, we made $400. That would mean, that we netted or our profit $100. In that case, our cost would have been $600. Right? So we think about materials and we think about labor. We also think about direct and indirect costs. So direct costs are things that can be specifically assigned to that crop. So things that we could say, okay, I know we put X amount of compost down in that bed. I can, and our compost costs this much per yard, so I can say this crop took this much amount in compost. Our indirect costs would be more things like insurance, liability insurance, workers' comp policies, those types of things. Not specifically assigned, but it's something that the farm has, and it's a cost that the farm has. And then we separate out our selling costs because I want to know how much it costs us to go to either to market or deliver to restaurants. Sales efficiency we talked about. Depreciation we'll look at a little closer, but that's the way we account for the cost of the structures or the cost of the high tunnels. And then our wages are paid and unpaid. So we have paid labor. We're an LLC, so my wife and I, the labor is in a way unpaid, but we take draws when we need to take draws. So disbursements. So, and then we also have direct wages for harvesting, those types of things. We also have some overhead, and we have selling wages as well if we send someone to market. Right. So real quickly, we'll go through an example here. And then we'll look really closely at those numbers. We'll wrap up in about 12 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions. So this is kind of the number of ways that we've heard farmers talk about how they determine their prices, what other farmers charge, what's being sold at the terminal market or the grocery store, what their cost of production is, plus a percentage, what they would pay themselves, or what they'd like to make. So the what they'd like to make, I think, is one of the best ways out of here, especially when people are first getting started and don't know what their cost of production is, don't know how long it takes to do things. Okay. So what we've done is kind of set this goal when we started of grossing $20,000 in a 30 by 96 foot tunnel. And we're not there, but we are definitely getting closer to that number. And so we kind of break it down so that it's a lot more understandable or a lot more doable, or it's easier to get my head around. If we have instead of saying $20,000 out of that space, if we have 5 beds and we need to make $4,000 per bed, or we can break it down even more and say if we have 3 crops, we need to make $1,333, or if we have 4 crops, we need to make $1,000 on that crop. Those numbers, especially the bottom 2, are much more easy for me to understand than $20,000 out of that space. So here's an example. This is our spacing. These are pretty close to our yields. So each of those beds, so let's say we do carrots, right, 6-inch by 2-inch spacing. We end up with about 520 carrots. We do about 7 rows. We take that times 0.80. We take about 80% when we do projections, both for things that we eat, and we know obviously we're not getting 100% germination. And there's some that's also unmarketable, especially carrots if you pull them out and they're kind of gnarly. So but we end up with about 3,000 carrots. We put about 8 in a bunch depending on their size. So that lets us project we're going to have about 370 bunches. So if we need to make $1,000, we can take that and divide it by 370, and that would be if we were getting 4 crops in there. If we need $1,300 or 3 crops, then we'd need to be selling them for about $360 a bunch. All right, baby salad, we can do the same thing. I know that 1 pound per 6 square feet is a good yield number. I'm confident and comfortable with that. We get a little bit more than that now, but that's a good number, I think, for someone who's experienced and has done it a lot. For people who aren't experienced with baby salad, I think that number is probably more closer to 1 pound per 10 square feet or so. We get 3 cuttings out of it, so we're a little, 174 pounds. We have a much higher germination rate and a much less, call rate with the baby salad, but we do eat a lot of it, so we say we're about 90%. So then we can take that 156 pounds and divide it, the $1,000 or the $1,300 to kind of get us what price we need to be at to be able to make, make that target that we're shooting for. And then tomatoes, we do a couple different spacings: 1 foot for heirlooms, 2 feet for cherries, 18 inches for red slicers. This 10 pounds per plant is really is a low yield. What we shoot for more is between 15 and 18. But we don't take then, if we use this 10 pounds per plant, we don't take out anything that we eat or we can or we give to friends or anything like that. So I think this yield, at 1,170 pounds is low, but it gets us, I'd rather underestimate than overestimate. So, but still at that many pounds, we need to sell them at 85 cents a pound or at $1.13 a pound, depending on if we're getting 3 or 4 crops in those beds. And our tunnel tomatoes, and no one should be selling their tunnel tomatoes for that price, so they should definitely be higher than that. Right. So if we put all of ours together, these are kind of the prices where we're at. Right, our goal was $4,000, so we can say, you know, we do sell carrots for $3 a bunch. Our baby salad runs about $8, runs a little more at the market, but we sell most of it through restaurants. And then our tomatoes are about $2.50. We're a little higher than that. Heirlooms are $4, cherries are $3, slicers are $3 early, but then later in the year things drop down. So you know, I think that's a fairly conservative price for tunnel tomatoes. But we're still at about $5,500. So we can start to say, okay, this is, you know, these numbers are kind of adding up and making sense, and they're doable. Right. So that's kind of the make it work on paper model, which we all know everything works out on paper. And then here we'll look at one that is a little more realistic. So these are real numbers from our farm. So, you know, pre-plant, we've got these different, you know, costs that go in. So, right, if we think about our bed prep, we assume labor at about $10 an hour. We pay our labor right now $9 an hour. We add in payroll taxes, and they're both getting a raise to $10.50 at the 1st of June. So it'll be a little bit, for this purpose, this was around what we were paying for labor. So and we have tilling, we have some blood meal, we have those amendments, we've got time, we've got mileage to pick up blood meal. Compost, we can say price per yard and then how much we put in, and then labor. And again, it's not, the numbers aren't that important, it's more the concept and thinking about the things that go into figuring out what our cost of production is. All right, then we've got drip, so we've got the costs of drip, we've got different barbs, we've got hoses to get over to the drip lines, and then we've got labor to set it up as well. In the winter, we've got this internal cover that we put on, which has a cost as well. So, you know, there's row cover, wire strainers, high tensile wire to hold it up, and the labor to set it up. So we get a total for the house, and then we can divide that out by bed. All right, so if we look at just those three things, right, what we're saying for one bed is that we're at about $70 or so in costs before we even put a seed in the ground. So then we've got depreciation. So we have the cost of our tunnels, and we need to account for those. It costs us money, and we've got a loan that we need to pay back. So for us, we bought these tunnels used. We got a really good price for them because they were used, but we did have to buy some new things and retrofit them. So, you know, the frames and end walls we got for about $4,000 for 3 30 by 96s and one 30 by 48. We had to buy the ground posts. We had to buy roll-ups and lumber, and then I paid a crew to help me tear them down and move them and rebuild them. So it cost us about $14,000. So the length of our loan is 4 years. So we depreciated this over 4 years. We could depreciate it over 20 years, which is probably the life of the structure at least. But we have to have our loan paid back, so we need to make this money back and be able to pay it in 4 years. So what we do is take our total cost, which is that almost $14,000, divided by 4 years, and we get that we need about $3,500 per year in depreciation. Our aisleways don't pay for any of our, they don't generate any revenue for us. They're just where we can go to harvest. So we look at just our production space, which in those 4 tunnels, one of them is completely storage wash pack, the other 3 are production. But we end up with about 5,200 square feet of production space. And so if we take that 3,500 divided by that total production space, we end up with about 66 cents per square foot per year, or 0.002 cents per square foot per day. So the reason we like that per square foot per day is that it lets us take that number, multiply it by the square footage planted, and then include the days. So this arugula, in this case, was in there for 102 days. And so it really lets us account and assign that depreciation specifically to that crop that was in that space. Right? So then we've got seeds. We make some assumptions about how many seeds are going down, what we pay for a half pound, how much we use in the time. So we're at about, close to $20 to put the seeds in the ground. Right? So in this case, we had about 1.5 beds planted. And so that cost, before we did any weeding, before we did anything, just to get the seeds in the ground and account for the depreciation, was about $230. So here's some actual yields from that. Where they went, restaurant versus farmer's market. Like I said, most of our product moves through the restaurant. We're at $7.50 there. We're at $10 at the market. Yields we know were lower than they were expected, and we assumed they were going to be because we planted later this year. Because we had to get the tunnels built and get things in, we tend to more plant those earlier in September. So we really only got around 1.5 cuts where we usually get 3 cuts on it. So yields were definitely lower. So we have additional costs, weeding, harvesting, packing. The beautiful thing about winter farming is that those are way lower costs, especially the weeding in the winter. So, and when weeding is lower and we aren't in there and there's not weeds, we can harvest a lot faster also. So to pack this 105 pounds or so, we had about 4.5 hours in labor of weeding, harvesting, and packing. We have delivery charges that we account for. So the top one is just one line or one row from our spreadsheet. But we have this each time we drive somewhere. We've got the date, the miles driven. We reimburse mileage at the IRS rate. We have the time to deliver. That hours cost is 2 hours at $10 an hour. We have the number of items, means we took 6 items. And so what we do is then take this total cost of $53 and divide it by 6, and then we can assign a certain amount of that to each crop. So when we look at the whole spreadsheet for the arugula, we end up with having farmers market and restaurant mileage and labor that's about $140. And then we have bags that we put things in as well to move. Right, which brings us back to this. And so now what? All right, so we can look at our yields, and they were low. Again, I said it's usually about 0.5 pounds per square foot. The reason they were low is we knew that we planted late, and our sales efficiency at 100% means we should have been planting more. Right, so the other thing that we can look at is, we'll go there. The other thing we can look at is some projections going out, where if we had that 0.5 pounds per square foot, what would that look like? So clearly it's a lot higher yield, it's a lot higher revenue, it's going to be higher costs. That we made some assumptions about higher costs for weeding, more hours for harvesting and packing, a little more in selling costs, but a lot more in net income, and we assumed that we weren't going to sell it all, so we assumed about 90% there. All right. So a couple more slides, and then we'll wrap up and have some time for questions. So, so here it allows us to figure out what our prices are. So if we look down at this bottom table, what we knew is our revenue was about $422. So I'm sorry, we knew that our yields were about 105 pounds, and so we can start saying, okay, at $4, what would we make? We'd make $5 if we charged $4 a pound. If we charged $6 a pound, we'd make $216. If we charged $8 per pound, we'd make $427. So we can start to fool around with these prices once we have an idea of what our yields are and what our costs are, and be able to really set our prices in a way that allows us to make some money. So we can't just pick a random, okay, $4, and we might sell it all, but if we only make $5 total off of that 105 pounds, that was not worth it. Right. The other thing for us is return to labor, and what's important is not so much what the return to labor is. For me, it's more important of what our return to labor is and how can I hire more employees, or can I think about having our employees do certain jobs. So things like, I'm really fast at harvesting baby salad mix versus them harvesting baby salad mix, and they're getting faster, but that lets me put them on, say, picking chard or kale or something that can be done a lot faster, and then me cutting baby mix. So it lets us decide, or lets me decide where I should be spending my time. All right, so I know that was a lot of numbers, and again, we're not so much wanting you to see or to think about the specific numbers, but more the concepts of how it works to think about cost of production there and be able to set your prices based on those types of things. So I think with that we can take some questions. Is that right, Eric?
Yes, that is correct. Your first question would be the baby lettuce. How do you seed that, and at what stage do you harvest?
Sure. So for baby lettuce, we kind of do a combination. We used to use the 6-row seeder, 6-row pinpoint seeder. We've switched over to using an earthway. I kind of have a love and hate relationship with the 6-row seeder, where I'm starting to come back around to love it again. But so we can do it with the 6-row seeder, or we can do it with an earthway. Either way, we get about 18 rows per bed when we do that. And so with the earthway, I've just gotten to a lot closer than when I first started using the earthway. Our yields were down because we were having about half as many rows as we did with the 6-row. So I think an earthway or Planet Junior or a 6-row seeder works really well for it. And then we harvest it. It's for the brassicas, so any of the like Mizuna, Arugula, those types of things are about this time of year. If they were seeded now, are about 3 weeks to first harvest. The lettuce are about 4 weeks to first harvest, and then both of those, going into May through May and early June, are about 2 weeks to reharvest, and then 2 weeks again. When we get into the summer, that switches to about every 7 to 8 days. They're ready to harvest again. So that kind of gives you an age, and if you think, I guess, size-wise, I don't want those leaves to be any bigger than, I think I have like average size hands. I don't want them to be any bigger than probably about half of my hand. So.
All right, thank you. When you were talking about ginger, when would you plant that in the hoop house, and when would that be harvested?
Sure. So the ginger right now is pre-sprouting in a heated space. So we got it in mid-March. It goes into a heated space where it's watered, high humidity, high temperature. And then it'll go out probably in 2 weeks. I was just looking at it this morning, and it's definitely got some sprouts that are about an inch or two up. So it'll go in. It definitely likes it hot. I don't like to push it too early. So mid-May is a good time for it to go in for us. And then we usually, we've only grown it 1 year, but last year, from talking to other people too, we start harvesting it in around Labor Day or so, and then we harvest it as we need it coming out, and then it can't get frost damage on it. It'll get soft, and so we get to a point. Last year it was probably late September, early October, where we harvested everything that was left in there. It'll stay in the cooler for a while. The other thing that we did with it, with a lot of the restaurants that wanted it, is that we sold them large volumes of it and gave them the option to either pay for it all at that time, or if they bought a lot of it and they wanted to spread it out over, say, 3 months or 4 months, we would go ahead, and we did that with a couple of them also.
Thank you. For cucumbers and peppers, how do you prune and trellis them, and what resources do you recommend?
Sure. So for the cucumbers, we do double rows with 1 foot spacing. We prune them all to a single leader and run them up tomato twine and clip them with the tomato clips. I think that works. I don't think that's the only way to. Friends have definitely had success with like cattle panels in their tunnels and not having to do all the pruning. Lewis Jett has a really good growing cucurbits in the tunnels publication out there. He's at West Virginia now, but when he was I think he did that one when he was still at University of Missouri. And it goes through a lot of that and a lot of cultivar trials as well. So, and then the University of New Hampshire also has a really nice cultivar trial for both tomatoes and cucumbers. So that's, I think, for cucumber-wise. And then peppers, we do a double row at 18-inch spacing, and we basket weave them just like you would do with determinate tomatoes. So we don't prune our peppers at all, but we do, put a stake. They're 42-inch stakes. They get pounded in the ground enough to be, firmed in there and not fall over. And they go every 3 peppers for us, and then they're just basket woven as they grow.
All right. And could you speak a little bit more about salt buildup in your soil, why you wouldn't use animal manures for your composting source?
So I think that, I wouldn't say that we wouldn't use them, but we don't use them because just by the nature of animal waste, there's high soluble salts in there. And what ends up happening in a tunnel, and this would be in a stationary tunnel, so is that you get salt build up and we basically have no leaching in stationary tunnels. So what we're trying to do is avoid high salt buildup or salt toxicities, and I think the question we also need to be asking is what salts are building up. So, you know, if it's a chlorine salt, then clearly we have, or sodium, then we clearly have issues. If it's potassium salts or it's another, you know, magnesium salt, that we have other salts that could build up that might not have or might not cause issues. But I think that people are definitely questioning and looking at, you know, there is high soluble salts in animal waste, and what does that mean for basically production in an area where there's no leaching. So I think, you know, if you do have soluble salts or high soluble salts and you're seeing, I think what some people are seeing is that they have high soluble salts, but they're still not having any issues with the production. Other people are saying, you know, we could do things like the movable tunnels, which allow us to you know, have leaching in that space, or things like when we change the plastic every 4 to 6 years or 4 to 5 years, leaving it off for a season and trying to leach some of that out as well if there's issues. And again, I think if we just need to, I think we can also say that their potential is that nutrients and available nutrients in animal-based composts are much higher or much more available or much more present than in some grass-based, and that's a gross generalization, I know that, but that what we may be saying is that we don't need to apply as much, there's higher rates of animal-based composts as we may have to do with plant-based composts, and so to avoid that soluble salt buildup, it may be applying lower amounts of animal-based composts.
All right. Well, thank you. And do you do any intercropping, as like planting lettuce between your tomatoes, or your beds dedicated to a single crop?
So we do some intercropping. We didn't really in the past. We did this year a lot, mostly because of what happened with the weather and not being able to have space for a lot of the spring things to get in and get out. So all of our tomatoes right now have head lettuce intercropped with them, and it'll come out by the time the tomatoes need that space. We've done radishes on the edge of shelling peas or snap peas. So I think, you know, thinking about that space is a good idea, and thinking about how to use that space, especially early on in the year, when we might not be able to be outside, or later in the year when it's getting colder, we might have frosts early on, is worth it. And it's just, it adds another dimension into the rotation schedule, is the only somewhat challenge with it.
All right. Well, excellent. It looks like we're just about out of time. Want to thank you for your presentation here on high tunnels. I want to remind our participants that this is being recorded, and it will be on the OEFFA website and the Countryside Conservancy website here in a few days. So if you want to check your notes, review the information, it will be posted here shortly. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.